Okay. Welcome to the No Name Podcast, episode 113. Happy Mother's Day. So we're filming this pre-ahead, but this is for Mother's Day. So happy Mother's Day to all the mothers, grandmothers, influence people,
mother
spiritual
figures.
mother. See, I was gonna say spiritual mothers, but I wasn't sure whether to go that route. Spiritual mothers too.
Yeah.
Happy Mother's Day.
Yeah.
Happy Mother's Day.
Yeah.
It's always interesting to go into Mother's Day and, with our travel schedules or my travel schedule and a couple of things going on, we're filming this in advance. So we normally would have liked to bring on a couple of guests for Mother's Day, but we were unfortunately not able to plan that out.
Yeah.
But we'll do our best efforts. I don't know where to start at. I was looking at several different things. If someone has somewhere where to start, if not, I got an idea or two.
No, I don't know. I mean, because it's so the mother is, you started to think about mothers, man. That's a question that I like to ask people when I ask them, how do they, you exist? If your mother had you, her mother had her.
Mm-hmm.
Then how would you get to first mother that started creation? Well, not creation, but humanity.
Yeah.
So that's the question that I always ask. And we could say Eve is the first mother.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, that's just it.
I don't know. It's interesting. I think when you look at it, and again, maybe because of more recent politics and things that have gone on, which I'm not trying to get into that piece of it, but motherhood, conception, and things like that have been in the forefront of our society, in the last 10, 15 years, probably more in the last 10 years, really, of, what it is to be a woman, what it is to be a mother, what is the start of life and conception and things of that sort. And it's interesting, the whole concept of it, because if you go back to the beginning, like you were talking about, going all the way back to Genesis, and kind of from our last podcast, you have this whole thing of it took one entity, which is God, to create life, but yet it takes two human beings to create life. Now, I'm sure you can go into the whole scientific part of, insemination or whatever it's called.
Oh, insemination? Artificial insemination? Okay.
You can go into that, but you still have to get the sperm from somewhere.
Of course.
And there's still an egg that has to be
fertilized.
Yeah.
Right.
And so God always made it that there had to be two to create life versus where there was only, again, not disputing the 3 in 1 in the Trinity, but it only took God to create life. God didn't need help to create life. Like the angels watched, they were there, but it wasn't them helping them. It was him creating life and forming life and creating the two lives, right? And so it's just kind of interesting that when you look at it from a mother's standpoint and human beings, like that's one of the likeness we have back to the Creator, is that we're able to create life, but we're not able to create life on our own.
Right. Wow. I never thought about it like that.
You need that assistance. And I think that's kind of what you see where God, again, puts us together, kind of showing the creation of life and the formation of life. In essence, I think to help us as we kind of were going back to that journey about the relationship with God and understanding the relationship with God, because I think for both man and woman, when you create life, you in essence become almost a creator yourself. And even though it's not at the aspect of God of creating all of humanity, you now have a little view into creating something. And sometimes that creation turns out the way you want it. Sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's going to make you happy. Sometimes it's going to make you sad. Sometimes it's going to make you laugh. Sometimes it's going to make you cry.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's going to bring you joy, and then sometimes it's going to bring you worry and pain. And it's that aspect that God has and I think from parenthood you get a small view into that, right? Because your view is just for your kin versus his view is for all of humanity. Like, how does he choose sides of all of humanity when they're fighting each other? You know, it's a whole different aspect versus you see your kid fighting someone else. You definitely know what side you're picking.
Oh, yeah.
And so it's a whole view into it. And I think that's where, like, even the Jewish, as they're going in faith and things like that, I was looking up for Mother's Day. One of the things I was kind of, and people always go to this, and I just kind of went down a rabbit hole for a bit, but it was more around the legacy of faith, and it was around, like, Timothy. And if you read about Timothy, one of the things Paul specifically calls out, which is always interesting, and it's in 2 Timothy, but what he calls out is both his grandmother and his mother. And how they instilled faith in him. And it's interesting because there's not much mention about them. There's that, and then maybe another piece, and there's a little bit, and you get to understand Timothy's back history on certain stuff. But Timothy was raised in a mixed household because his mom was Jew, but his dad was Greek. And the way it makes it understand, and that is, his father wasn't completely a believer because they would have mentioned him more, but his mother and his grandmother were held to the Jewish traditions and taught him the faith through the Jewish piece. So when Paul meets him, and then somewhere down the line they get saved, they hear about Jesus and they get saved. Some believe during Paul's first journey there because he meets Timothy in the second. But Timothy comes from this household of being mixed, and then at the same time, if he were to go to Jerusalem, being completely rejected. Because he would not have been seen as a Jew there. And that's why Paul even tells them, to get circumcised, because he's going to go to places where it's already going to be hard enough. They're not going to accept him because he's half Greek. But you see where Paul emphasizes more of his understanding of the relationship with God, and it was passed down by his grandmother and his mother. And I think that's part of the thing with parenthood. And it's always hard. Like, we try to split it out and make sure we focus on mothers on Mother's Day and fathers on Father's Day. But it's the whole piece of it, of the parenthood, of passing down. You can't force faith on them, but you can be examples of faith. And again, the Bible doesn't give us that much insight to it, but it was enough to influence.
Was that an interracial relationship?
I guess, yeah, it would have been an interracial relationship.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. But it's interesting during that time, if you look at the Romans and the Greeks and stuff, I don't think they cared so much about interracial relationships.
Yeah, especially the Romans. We know the Romans.
Well, because they were conquering countries and worlds and stuff, and so they didn't care about it. Now, the Jews were very big on the pure blood.
Oh yeah, definitely.
And you take that all the way back to the earlier generations, but I think it's interesting. Like, you see the influence of what Timothy is going to be, right? And a lot of it is, I think there's part of his Greek culture that left him open, which I truly believe. I mean, his mother, the way they describe it, his mother and grandmother got saved through as well, right? They knew the Hebrew laws, but they learned about Jesus, right? Because it mentions them as people of faith, and not just faith in the Jewish, but faith in Christianity. And I say that because I honestly believe, like, his story had to have been written, like, his grandmother had to have been part of one of the exiles and was moved away from Jerusalem, allowed her daughter to marry a Greek man. Okay. Which means there's an open-mindedness there already, which makes it a little bit more acceptable to believe Jesus is the Messiah. Because if you remember, if you go straight to the Jews in Jerusalem, there's no way how many miracles a lot of them are going to believe that Jesus is the Messiah, because they're very, very held to their traditions that the Messiah is going to come and save them from a tyranny on the earth.
Right, they had a whole different view.
And yet they've been separated from this, and they hold on to their faith, but they also understand how faith adapts. right? And not adapts from the truth, but adapts to human society and stuff like that. And so it allows, what's always interesting is Paul was told that he was going to go preach to the Gentiles, but Paul was all Jew. But now one of his main disciples, he's a half-breed. He's part Jew, part Gentile. He's this person that can sit in both worlds and understand both worlds. He can understand what it is to be a Gentile, but he can also understand what it is to be Jewish. And you have this, but the cornerstone of who he is was founded through his grandmother and his mother.
Wow, really?
And I just think that's one of the key things. I think, so going back to what I was starting off with, is the importance of motherhood and fatherhood and parents. It's the influence you leave, right?
Oh yeah.
You can tell that's what I always found interesting. You can tell your kids do this and do that, but if you yourself are not doing it, it's a little harder for them to take it in. As much as you think that they're not watching, they're not looking, they're not seeing. And his grandmother and mother must have still been living their faith, because that's what he stood on top of.
And you know what? That's true, bro. That's 100% true. Like, you have to be an example for your kids to see. You can't just tell them. I know as me as a kid growing up, and my mother would be like, go in there and clean the room up. Mm-hmm. Go clean your room up. Nice bit. Yeah. But when I would go and see her room would be clean.
Yeah. Now, if it was a mess, imagine what you would have told her.
So I wouldn't have told her nothing. Because it'd have been Changla City, boy, boom. Yeah. No, but I mean, I think that's exactly correct,
I like what, what's his name? Tony.
I was like, what?
Wait a minute. Wait a minute. What?
About spiritual mothers, like our nurseries and our children's church, and then the church, they help the parents to train their child, and because you can put anybody to be in those positions, but that doesn't mean they have the love for the children. Yeah. And kids right away can tell.
They know. Oh yeah.
Can tell. And that's why I've always said, it's not the one who brings the kid into the world, it's the one who raises the kid.
Wait, elaborate on raise the kid.
Wait,
elaborate on that. Raise the kid.
What I mean is like I had 2 kids before me and Fidelia got married and all that. But I never knew them or anything, so I can't claim that I'm their father, because I didn't raise them. I wasn't there for them.
Okay.
At that time I was young. I was out on the streets, and and all that. So, I can't say, now did I father them? Yes. But am I their father? No. One was adopted in California, and you might even be working with Tony. And the parents that adopted him, those are his true parents. Because his mom was a drug addict, until now she's in prison, And the other one here, I never saw him, I saw him once or twice when he was a baby, because the mom let me see him. But once the daughter found out, that was it. She moved to Oklahoma for a while, and then after that I lost contact. So there's a lot of, situations where there's women that can't have children, but that doesn't mean that they're not mothers.
Mm-hmm.
They help raise nephews, they help raise, other. Nowadays a lot of people that get married, they come with children already, and they help them raise and all that, and they love them like that. You see, and I believe God gave that to the mothers, that love, because they say that's the closest thing that you can compare on earth to God's love. Because a mother's love is a sacrificial, You know, and when I started the ministry and all that, we were starting the family too. You know, I told Fidelia, look, I'll concentrate in the ministry, concentrate on raising our kids. Because in the organization I was, they had this, that they, you know, they always had like nannies and people always taking care of them, almost 24/7. They were the mother, and I said, no, if God gave us these children, it's our responsibility. Now, yeah, once in a while, yeah, have somebody to take care of them and all that. And if we are working or whatever, you know, that's understandable.
Mm-hmm.
But when you can and you don't, that's a different story. So I would tell her, God gave us these children. It is our responsibility to do. And you know what? Fidelia agreed, which a lot of women probably wouldn't. And say, no, I'm involved in the ministry with you. We're going to, you know, once they grew up and everything now, she's more involved with me in the ministry. I mean, she was involved, but not, you know, we would go out of town when I was preaching and teaching. I would take them, when, especially close by, we would take them, you know, I would go to Austin and teach and preach over there. I would take them, and Fidelia would stay with them at the hotel and all that, and they would go around and, you know, and I was able to do what I was able to do, you know. And nowadays, you don't see that a lot.
Yeah.
Who's
to say, like, what kind of, you know, the impact that will have on, you know, that child's life? You know, I mean, my wife, she doesn't have any kids. I got several coworkers who are in their like 50s. They don't have any kids, but they got nieces, you know, and nephews that they take care of. That's, to me, that's still being like a mother.
Yeah. In the,
You know what I mean?
Mexican tradition way back then, Manny, the grandparents most of the time were the ones that raised the grandkids. Because the mothers, the fathers, whatever, they were very young and they didn't do it, and the grandparents.
Yeah.
You know, I used to call my grandmother and grandfather at that time Ma and Pa, you know, Dad and Mom, because that's how we saw them too, not only as grandparents. We saw them like that, you know. And, you know, your wife was helping you when your brother was there with your nephews,
with my
and
nephews.
she probably still does.
Oh yeah.
You know, just
Even her own niece and nephew.
right. You know,
Like-
so you know that's the love of a mother. You know, that's the love of a mother. And they might not call her that, but that's what that is.
Yeah.
Because that's
agree.
what a parent is. You know, care.
Yeah, no.
And love them, you know, and care for them, and make sure that, you know, they're doing good and all that. You know, because that's what Proverbs 31:25 says. She is clothed with strength and dignity, and she laughs without fear of the future. You know, and you know, a mother, she's a strength of the family, and she's a clothes. She clothes her children, takes care of them, and makes sure not only physically but spiritually.
Yeah.
You know, and you know, and I do believe when they say that the closest love that you can compare to God's love, I mean, it's no comparison to what God did.
Yeah.
But the closest, if you want to compare on earth, I believe is the love of a mother.
Let's be honest. There's some mothers that they will go freaking to the end of the earth for their kids. You know, not like father. You know, as a father, I'm a little more rational. Right? I'm more like, okay, wait, let's figure this out first, and let's go here.
Yeah.
But you know, mothers is like, no, you're hurting. No, let me go get you out of this now. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's and I think when I say think, I know you're right. A mother's love is entirely different, you know, than a father's love, than a friend's love, than a grandparent's, you know, any of that, you know. I don't know. I think that's more or less because you have a connection with you was inside your mother's body. So maybe you just have more of a connect. I don't know. I just know that I know some mothers with their kids, they will go figure to the end of the earth
Yeah.
for their kids.
And then there's mothers that abandon their kids and abort them.
Yep.
You know. You know, and you know, whatever the reason, I want to get into that politics, you know, all that.
What is that? Roe versus Wade?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But you know, to me, regardless, it's not that kid's fault.
Yeah.
You know, whatever happened, that situation, and you know, and now with the education and all that, there shouldn't be no reason. You know, now nothing is 100%. The condoms are 100%. The birth control pills are not 100%. But but the ones that, the ones that came for whatever reason, they wish to quit, and the ones that can, some of them don't want them.
Yeah.
But going back to the love, because that's what we're talking about. The mothers, they have a special, and that's why like our church, our church, our children's church, and our nursery and all that. They help out. They love the kids and all that, and and you can see the effect. I've seen the effect. My kids grew up in the nursery, children's church. They might have swayed a little bit, but whatever they learned there, and then they had some bad experience with some bad, teachers or whatever in the children's church and the youth, because they were pastors' kids. They were supposed to act certain ways and blah, 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 this and that. But most of them, they had the mother's heart. They care for their children, and all that.
But the thing that's, I guess I'll save that topic for another day, because that'll take us down to a different topic.
Okay.
Well, no, because, let me get to the first point. One, I think for mothers and just parents as a whole, but mothers, I mean, when you look at it, it's all about sacrifice, and that's really at the core of it. Again, I know we always like to compare parents' love, both father, mother, and then really we're talking about mothers today back to God's love. But it only is comparable to God's love when you're willing to sacrifice.
Right.
And that's for both, because the moment you create life, now you're sacrificing a portion of yourself to say this life is going to be more important than mine.
Yeah.
And that's not an easy decision to make, but we take it lightly nowadays. And that's the same thing. Like, if you look at God, when God created life, in essence, again, like going back to the beginning, he was willing to sacrifice his son and then a part of himself for the creation that he made. Because he knew and all knowing that he was going to have to sacrifice something for it. And that's one of the issues that, again, nowadays, and it's not just now, I mean, this kind of topics have been around for years.
Right.
Is, are you willing to sacrifice yourself? And sometimes we find ourselves in positions and decisions too early in life to make that sacrifice. Mm-hmm. And so we choose other options and decisions. That's where the love of God comes in, and the grace and mercy. And that's really where you see that portion of it kind of come from. And I think that's one of the things about when you select to be, so the selection of being a parent should actually happen very much in the beginning, right? So if you look at it, you should be deciding that you're going to be a parent before you engage in the act of becoming a parent.
Correct. I got you.
The issue is
say less.
The issue is we as human beings like to do things opposite.
Correct.
And so we
say less.
We make the decision afterwards.
Say less.
And that's part of again, that's us ruining the design of what God had created. Because
I'm sorry, Tony, but I just think I don't think people count the cost, man. I don't.
Well, that's what I mean.
I don't think people understand that once you create a life, your life is going to change.
Yeah.
It's life altering.
Yeah.
It's you have another human being now that is not only someone that you have to take care of.
Yeah.
But that's a part of you now.
Yeah.
That's you right there.
Yeah.
So I don't think people think that through.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, going back to what I started off with, if you look at Eunice and Lois the grandmother, Eunice the mother,
right?
She fell in love with a Greek guy. Now, she had to, my assumption, again, this is me filling in the blanks, so I'm not saying this is, I can put it back with factual history, but what the evidence shows of it is She chose someone who was going to allow her to teach her children her ways.
Yeah, her way.
Because she could have chosen a Greek man who was
Correct.
no,
Yeah.
he's gonna learn about our gods,
Right.
you
Easily.
know, the Zeus and all these other things. And he probably did learn about some of it, but he also got to learn about his history of coming through Judaism and how God, brought them out of Egypt, how he handled the Passover, how they spent 40 years in there. He was taught all these things. And that's one of the things, again, you can't go back and change time. So my statement earlier was just about the matter of the facts, but wherever you find yourself in your stage of motherhood, whether you're a mother physically or you're a mother spiritually, or you're a mother by influence, it's a matter of what you do in that moments and in those times that really will impact somebody. So how you show love, how you show grace, and how you show mercy. But again, if you're trying to do it on your own ability, just like fathers, you're going to fail at it. It's always got to be with God in the middle of it. Because again, these two women, they had a relationship with God. Now, again, somehow they were open to the understanding. It always brings us back to the stories in the gospel. There were certain Jews who were open to the understanding of the relationship of God and Jesus being the Messiah. These two women somehow were a part of that. And it's even more interesting because typically, women knew the stories. Women were there, but they were only with a certain part of the synagogue. Like, these women were strong in their faith. And I don't know if Timothy went to the synagogues or anything like that, but they were strong enough that without the writings, without the priests, let's say he didn't go to the synagogues in Greece, they were teaching them by memory. Because it would be rare that a woman would own a scroll it was rare anyone owned the scrolls. Mm-hmm. The scrolls were typically in the synagogues, but they're teaching them the history of his faith. And you have to have a strong understanding of that and that ability. And I think that's part of the influence of what you've seen. And I think even with today, again, it's the little things that you're doing and showing God's grace and mercy. You can always tell your kids to go do this and that, but it's the grace and mercy that you show them and how your relationship with God is and things like that. And I guess maybe it does take me back to that because, as you were saying, we were raised in a church and we swayed. And I wouldn't say so much swayed. We were on a journey. We had to go look, And that's one of the things sometimes, and it's not even just with pastor kids, it's just kids in general that are raised in church.
Of course.
We expect them to be perfect, and we forget that they're on a journey. It's just their journey started at a church versus journeys of first generation kids started out in the world. But we're still part of the world.
Same. Yeah.
We're still part of that, and we have to go through those journeys. You have to go through that. I wish that when you were born, you were anointed and just meant you were saved and you never made a bad decision in your life. But that's not the truth.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
We all know that's not true.
You gotta go find the reasoning why you need a savior.
Yeah.
And no coloring book's gonna tell you that. You have to go find it for yourself, and that's part of the journey of it. And I think, but if you have the guidance, as you're saying, of Christian parents who, and by Christian parents I don't mean just say you're Christian, but you're living that life. But living it in transparency.
As an example.
That there's struggles, there's pain, there's suffering. Because sometimes that's one of the faults that you'll find in a lot of church, at least my opinion, a lot of kids who are raised in church, their parents never showed them the struggles of their journey of Christianity. Sometimes they do have doubt. Yeah. Sometimes they do make mistakes. Sometimes they're not going to be perfect. And when you have that, then all of a sudden you're thinking you're living to a standard that you can't measure up to. But when you can see the flaws, the imperfections, and you understand God's love and mercy and grace, then that allows you to go through the things that you're going through and do those things. And that happens at the church and the nursery as well. You have that love, that grace, that mercy. But it's part of life. And I think that's like the most important thing when you're as a mother, as a father, is just being able to show God's mercy and grace. And again, when you look at the Bible as a whole, God calls that to do it to everyone.
Yeah.
Calls us to have mercy and grace and love for everyone. But he specifically calls out in the Bible. When you look at it, Jesus calls out, and I think Paul echoes it, and God echoes it, and God calls it out in the beginning, specifically for parents. Your first measure and your first ministry is to be able to do that to your kids.
Yeah, train
because
train
if
your
you
child in the ways of the Lord. Is that what you're talking about?
Well, that and just throughout all of it, because the things is if you can't even show mercy and grace to your own kids, how are you going to show mercy and grace to strangers? Right? That because those came from you.
Yeah.
They're your kin. They're your blood. And I think that's part of it, right? Then you start seeing that, and I think that's why it's such a big job for parents, right? A lot of times you think our job is just to get them to 18 years old, and then you're out the door, and you wipe your hands clean and you're good.
Nope.
But it's really about the love, the grace, and the mercy, of who God is. And I think that's why, like, for parents, you always have to look back to God. Just like us Christians, we all got to look back to God. But you got to look back to God and understand, okay, what's his characteristics with me? God's patient with us, right? He literally could have said every time we made a sin, I'm gonna enforce what the law actually says, but he doesn't. He shows grace to us,
and mercy.
And yeah, and that's what I mean. Like he talks to us in loving kindness. Is he stern with us at times? Yeah. Does he correct us at times? Yes, definitely. But he always does it in a loving way, and I think that's one of the things that I always encourage parents that, it's not about being perfect, but it's about demonstrating the love that God has for us. Because if you can demonstrate that, now you're setting your kids up into a better stance to understand God's love, mercy, and grace. I truly believe for myself, that's a reason why I'm able to have the relationship I have with God, is because of that. I don't know. I was thinking earlier, I think parents, you influence your kids in two ways. Either to demonstrate some of your characteristics because you showed good characteristics and you showed them, and they want to emulate that because they felt what it was to be loved, the grace and mercy. Or you were a very horrible example and they don't want to be nothing like you. They try to go to the complete opposite. But one way or the other, you're going to influence your kids.
Yeah.
But it's just a matter of what influence are you going to be? Are you going to be that influence that's what they want to emulate, right? That's what they want to demonstrate. They want to show that love, that grace, that mercy, that sacrifice, and so that's just, again, that's part of it. And I think that's the main thing, right? And again, the relationship between parent and child evolves through time. How you are with them in their early years is going to be different how you are as they're adults, but it doesn't change the format. It doesn't change the relationship of that piece. So I thought you had something. I thought you had something to say. Oh, but I think that's kind of the core thing. Right? I mean, again, one, thank you to all the mother figures, mother influential spiritual mothers out there.
Yeah.
I think I always hesitate on saying spiritual mothers because there's the people that take it to the extreme and they want you to call them mom. I'm like, that's a little weird.
Yeah.
I got one mom, I think, and that's about it.
No, you do. You only have one. No thinking.
I don't know. Sometimes I say I was raised by wolves, so it's hard to tell. No.
I forgot your name.
I know. See, exactly. No. I do have one mom, but that's why I always hesitate on spiritual moms. But there are spiritual mothers out there like that, and it's not about this person came to faith from me. Your spiritual moms and spiritual fathers will change throughout time, and it's not about calling them mom and dad. It's a matter of they influence you, they guide you in your spiritual walks and things like that, and that's so that you can do the same to others. And again, I think thank you, because if you are doing any one of those roles or all of those roles, it's not easy.
That's right.
It's not easy. In every single one of those roles, you've accepted to sacrifice a bit of yourself. You know, whether it's for your own child or for people in the church or whatever the case may be. So thank you. It's not easy. And then also cling on to God. Hold on to him. It's not an easy job, and sometimes it's a thankless job. But his grace and mercy is sufficient to help you through it. And hopefully you feel that grace, and hopefully you feel, you know, the goodness that comes out of it. And again, just wishing everyone a happy Mother's Day. And
Happy Mother's Day. And you don't have to be a mother.
Yeah. Happy Mother's Day to all the mothers out there. Spiritual mothers and influential mothers. And any other mother that you want to fill in. God bless.
God bless.